The other top story this week is Sasha Banks and Naomi, the now former WWE Women's Tag Team Champions, being indefinitely suspended and stripped of their titles after walking out of this week's Monday Night Raw over what was said to be creative differences over plans that had nothing at all to do with them as tag team champions, but that would have seen them used individually to help basically put over the Raw and SmackDown Women's Champions. They took their ball and they went home. And it also appears that both of their contracts may be up shortly, so there's a chance that we may have seen the last of both these women in a WWE ring for a very long time. Things have gotten very nasty in the last 48 hours. They were suspended and stripped on Friday. They had all of their merch pulled off WWE Shop. WWE pulled down their official Facebook pages. They removed them from the signature at the start of the shows. Naomi has scrubbed all mentions of WWE from her social media bios. One thing is for sure, this made Monday Night Raw more interesting than it's been in years. And that's without them even appearing on the show. Everybody was picking this whole thing apart all week long, wondering, is it a work? Is it a shoot? Especially after what WWE did on SmackDown this week. A lot of people still insist that it's all a work. I don't know why people think it would be. This is World Wrestling Entertainment that we're talking about here. When was the last time they put together a story as compelling as this? These are the same people that gave us Happy Corbin and Madcap Moss stealing Drew McIntyre's sword and then interviewing it in the ring. When have they demonstrated the ability to write something as interesting as this? So let's take it back to the beginning of Raw on Monday night. WWE came on the air and they announced a 6-pack challenge for the right to find out who would be challenging Bianca Belair for the Raw Women's Championship at Hell in a Cell. Becky Lynch, Asuka, Sasha Banks, Naomi, Nikki Ash, and Doudrop were the names announced for the match. Nikki and Doudrop have been doing a storyline that was leading to the two of them becoming a team, probably with Nikki finally dropping the superhero gimmick. They already lost once on television to Sasha and Naomi, but they run the same matches back so many times, nobody would have blinked an eye if they would have done the match again on pay-per-view. And it looked like they were also setting up for a triple threat match with Bianca defending against Becky and Asuka. So when they announced this match and I saw Nikki and Doudrop involved, I figured, okay, this is to build to another match with Sasha and Naomi because they're in the match too. Otherwise, why the hell would those two even be in this match in the first place? Nikki and Doudrop. Especially Nikki, who's been losing all of her matches. I thought they would do some fluky finish involving Becky and Asuka, or one of them would win and the other one would end up being added to the match at the pay-per-view somehow. But that all went up in smoke when Mike Johnson broke the story on PWInsider.com. He had it first that 2 of the 6 talents involved in the match had left the building. That being Sasha and Naomi, said to be over issues with the creative that was presented to them. They met with John Laurinaitis, they laid their women's tag team belts down on his desk, and they walked out. They then had to scramble to shoot something backstage to explain the change to the main event, which they had already announced not even 45 minutes earlier. So they had Becky Lynch inform Adam Pearce that Sasha and Naomi, they packed their bags, they left the building, and she wanted to be named number 1 contender by default. And Pearce put her in a singles match with Asuka instead. There was no explanation given for why Nikki and Doudrop were suddenly out of the match. More than once during the show, Vince McMahon fed the line to Corey Graves that Sasha Banks and Naomi summarily and unprofessionally walked out. They summarily walked out. The only thing missing was a nonetheless or a notwithstanding to fill out the Vince McMahon bingo card, in case you couldn't tell who that line came from. People were attacking Graves on social media for calling them unprofessional, to the point that Carmella felt she had to stick up for her husband and say, imagine still living in a world where you think he just says whatever he wants. He does his job, period. Nothing like that gets said on the show without it coming from Vince McMahon. How do people not understand this by now? Why would they go after Corey Graves? Well, I mean, I know some of these people are unhinged. We know that. But why are you going after a guy who is, repeating lines that are clearly being fed to him? Vince McMahon is the one who is feeding these lines and this type of stuff to these people to regurgitate on the air. I mean, they're all his robots to program. He writes the code. He updates their firmware. He patches them himself when they go off script and they say something that even remotely sounds human. Pat McAfee, I think, is the only person who is actually able to get away with that for the most part. But that's because Vince knows that Pat McAfee he's a made guy. He doesn't need this. He can walk away from this at any moment and still be a multimillionaire. So Becky and Asuka, they've worked together plenty of times. So it wasn't hard for them to put together a match on short notice. Asuka misted her in the face when the referee wasn't looking, kicked her in the head and pinned her. So Asuka is going to challenge Bianca next month. I still think Becky finds her way in to make it a triple threat. That was the match that seemed to make the most sense. That is, until they decided to randomly book Naomi to win the match, as was the original plan. And, it's not even that I have an issue with one half of the tag team champions wrestling for a singles title. I mean, God knows we've seen that so many times before. Look, I've been pitching Randy Orton as an opponent for Roman Reigns on one of the upcoming pay-per-views many times over the last several weeks. But at least RK Bro has been feuding with the Bloodline. So at first it was rumored that Naomi was supposed to pin Sasha. Regardless, Naomi was going to win and she was going to go on to challenge Bianca, which is odd because Naomi is a member of the SmackDown roster. Now, I understand the women's tag team champions can defend their titles on Raw or SmackDown, but I'm not sure why that would include challenging for a singles title on a brand that you're not even a part of. I don't remember what brand Sasha and Bayley were on when they had all the titles during those pandemic shows a couple of years ago. It may have been a similar situation, and it would have been every bit as stupid then as it is now if they held singles belts for a brand that they technically were not on. But the idea was then to shoot an angle on SmackDown Friday night to set up Sasha Banks challenging Ronda Rousey for the SmackDown Women's title, also at Hell in a Cell. Sasha and Naomi would lose both of those matches and be used to put over the two singles champions and would not defend their tag team titles again until Money in the Bank in July. And the two of them were said to have expressed their concerns to their bosses about the creative earlier in the day on Monday. There was an alternate idea pitched where Sasha and Naomi would have a short tag team match, after which they would be beaten down by Nikki and Doudrop, which would then set up a rematch with them for Hell in a Cell. And that got rejected. And then right before Raw went on the air, Molly Holly, who works for them as a producer, went to Sasha and Naomi to let them know we're going to go with the original plan for the six-pack challenge. There was said to be a meeting at some point where Sasha and Vince McMahon both stood their ground on what they thought the creative should be. Neither one of them would budge. They were at a stalemate. And either just before or just after Raw went live, Sasha and Naomi dropped their belts on Johnny Ace's desk and they left. I can just picture Johnny Ace as the two of them turned around to go, "Where you going? Where you going? We got a match. Where you going? People power." So they disappeared. Vince McMahon was sitting at the gorilla position when he was told they had left. What I wouldn't give to have been a fly on the wall when that happened. Mike Johnson says the belief among some is that the creative issue was more with how the two of them would be portrayed over the next several weeks, after they had just put so much time into building their team once Vince issued an edict that they would become a team and would be winning the tag belts at WrestleMania. Now, all of a sudden, they'd be wrestling each other and then going off to put over other people while the tag belts would effectively be on ice. As soon as Raw ended, WWE issued a bizarre statement. Bizarre for them to put this out. This is what they said. When Sasha Banks and Naomi arrived at the arena this afternoon, they were informed of their participation in the main event of tonight's Monday Night Raw. During the broadcast, they walked into Head of Talent Relations John Laurinaitis' office with their suitcases in hand, placed their tag team championship belts on his desk and walked out. They claimed they weren't respected enough as tag team champions, and even though they had 8 hours to rehearse and construct their match, they claimed they were uncomfortable in the ring with 2 of their opponents, even though they had matches with those individuals in the past with no consequence. Monday Night Raw is a scripted live TV show whose characters are expected to perform the requirements of their contract. We regret we were unable to deliver as advertised tonight's main event. WWE apologizing for not delivering a match that they advertised. That was the funniest shit I think that I read all week. All week! This coming from people who change matches like they change their socks. The part about them being uncomfortable in the ring with 2 of their opponents is complete bullshit. I don't believe that for a second. That's just their way of burying them publicly because they were upset that they walked out. Later that night, there was a Twitter thread from a user who, from what I can gather, has some sort of ties to Naomi specifically. I know her official account is following this person's account at Adidas_head88 on Twitter. He posted a series of tweets that were clearly fed to him from the Sasha and Naomi camp. Whether it was Naomi directly or somebody close to Naomi, clearly, as I read this, you'll be able to tell exactly whose side of the story this is and where this was coming from. But this is what he said. You are approached in February about being put in a tag team after both being promised big feuds at WrestleMania. You bite the bullet and put everything you got into being a tag team. It works, you get over, win the titles at WrestleMania, and become merch pushers. 5 weeks into your reign, you show up to live TV ready to work. You are told that you will be in the main event, and you are happy. You both are then told that one of you will be going over from pinning the other. You have questions why that decision was made and how it helps you all. You request a meeting with your boss to discuss it. Your boss takes the meeting and everything is actually going well. He understands your concerns. The meeting ends well and the match is told to be reconstructed. For some reason, producers get mad about it. You then ask with one of your members going over what happens to your titles. You're told basically that you will just be carrying the belts. They want to use both of you to help women's champions get more over. Neither one of you will win the solo titles and you won't defend your tag titles until Money in the Bank. You ask for another meeting with your boss, but this time you're being called spoiled. A producer walks away screaming. He comes back and tells both of you to fix your attitudes. You have a brief meeting amongst yourselves and decide to stand up for yourselves. You go to another boss and make it clear you just have concerns. You ask, why are we even in this match? Why aren't other women in it? You ask why your titles have no stories for 2 months. Again, you are met with fix your attitudes. So after one final meeting with yourselves and asking others, you make the ultimate decision as a team. It is sad how one side is trying to create a fucked up narrative. Also, it was asked why were Nikki, Ash, and Doudrop in the match instead of starting their programs tonight. Naomi nor Sasha talked down about being in the ring with either one. I don't know how that got flipped. So based on that, they claim that the meeting went well with Vince. But if Vince McMahon agreed with their concerns and wanted the match changed, it would have been changed. Even if some producer mouthed off to them, it's still their boss's call to make. Jamie Noble is not booking the show. Sean Daivari is not booking the show. Shane Helms is not booking the show. Molly Holly is not booking the show. Vince McMahon is booking the show, so their meeting with Vince did not go as well as they thought it did. Sasha and Naomi's main concern, and it should be noted that neither woman has made any kind of public statement since this all went down. They're going to have to give their side of the story directly from their own mouths at some point instead of feeding it to a random person on Twitter. But their concern seems to boil down to this. There was no direction for the tag team titles. The titles and the work they put into their run together in their mind were being devalued. And people are going to call them brats and they're going to call them marks over it. I already see it up and down my timeline. Oh, what a bunch of marks. I'm not going to mock somebody for caring that creative is not what it should be. And speaking up about it and trying to fight City Hall, or if promises were made that they feel were broken. The worst I can say about Sasha Banks and Naomi is that they were delusional. They were naive and delusional if they thought those belts had any value to begin with. I'm not going to fault them for thinking that maybe they could change things. They wouldn't have. It's noble that they thought they could, but they're fooling themselves if they thought they could make a difference. For months now, I have been calling those women's tag belts paperweights because that's all they're good for. If I was having a backyard barbecue for Memorial Day next week and I needed something to weigh down the tablecloth because it was too windy outside, I would want to have those women's tag belts to weigh it down and make sure that all my napkins and all my paper plates wouldn't go flying into my neighbor's yard. I guarantee if they put little paperweight replicas of those belts up on WWE Shop, they would make a killing. The women's tag team titles have been a joke almost from the moment they were introduced. There was a movement for WWE to bring back the women's tag team titles. You know who led that movement? One of the leading voices in this movement? Sasha Banks. Sasha Banks and Bayley were actively campaigning for those titles. And they got them. But there's a saying, be careful what you wish for. 6 weeks later, they put the belts on the Iconics. Dead. Dead before they even had a chance. It's been 3 years since then. It hasn't gotten any better. They've had moments where the belts were on some of the bigger names in that division. Sasha and Bayley, they had them for a while. The Kabuki Warriors held them for a little bit. But for the most part, those titles have been treated as a complete afterthought. Because WWE never wanted women's tag team titles in the first place. They died in the 80s with the Jumping Bomb Angels and the Glamour Girls thanks to the Fabulous Moolah. The Fabulous Fraud. This time they had to be held at gunpoint to bring them back. Do you honestly believe that Vince McMahon and Bruce Pritchard and Michael Hayes and the writers were sitting around dying to write stories for women's tag team titles? That they threw a fucking party the day they were introduced? They all went out to the bar after the Elimination Chamber that night and partied until the sun came up? I mean, Michael Hayes probably did. He doesn't need a reason to do that. No, Vince McMahon, he went back to his hotel room when the show was over. He climbed into his coffin. He got his nightly 90 minutes of sleep. He woke up and he went back to the gym, thinking of ideas for Brock Lesnar and Roman Reigns and Charlotte Flair. Those belts never meant anything because they weren't presented as something truly valuable. So it's about time somebody stood up and asked the question, why is this being done this way? And it's not even that I have such an affinity for the women's tag belts. It's the principle of the matter here, right? In terms of just general creative. It's about time that somebody stood up and asked the question, why is this being done this way? This doesn't make a lot of sense. Maybe we need to be doing this another way, keep the focus on these things, since we're the ones carrying them around with us on television every week. I applaud Sasha and Naomi for standing their ground. Now, there's a price to be paid for that. They're finding that out the hard way right now, and WWE is well within its rights to punish them for it. Doesn't mean I don't support them. Wade Keller on the PW Torch website said that the people he's been in touch with in WWE are puzzled by their actions. They cannot understand why they did what they did. They say that it sounds like Sasha is overreacting to a normal day at the office, that it was likely a case where she was the leader in this and Naomi went along with her because that's her partner, and basically in so many words, I guess it was a ride or die type of thing. Overreacting to another day at the office sounds to me like a bunch of blind sheep who accept mediocrity as the norm. Oh, it's just another day. I don't know what the big deal is. I don't know why she has to make a big fuss about this. I mean, if you think about it, the original plan is typical WWE booking. They probably can't understand what the problem is. It would have gotten them a couple of pay-per-view title matches and multiple segments on TV to build things up. What's the issue? Why are they so upset? They were put together in a team out of the blue because they had nothing for them to do. And it's interesting in that statement from the person on Twitter, where again, clearly this was being fed to him by their camp. It's very interesting. They also mentioned promises made that were broken. Naomi had already wrapped up her story with Sonya Deville weeks before WrestleMania, which I thought was very strange. That thing dragged on for so long past the Royal Rumble that I thought, okay, well, we're so close to WrestleMania. You may as well pay off the story there. Throw in the stipulation that if Sonya loses, she loses her power and her position of authority in the company, and Naomi gets the big heroic win in the end. Well, she got the heroic win, but it was in a random match on SmackDown, and that was the end of the feud. It was just over at that point. Sasha Banks, very likely, would have been the one challenging Charlotte Flair for the SmackDown Women's title at WrestleMania until Ronda Rousey came back, and she got the spot instead. I said that at the time. It looked like it was going to be Charlotte and Sasha at WrestleMania until they realized, okay, we got Ronda back. And then everything changed. So they went with what they were given. They tried to make the most of it. Now you want to send them off in opposite directions and put the belts on ice when they've been trying to make chicken salad out of chicken shit? I'd be frustrated too. I'd throw my hands up in the air too if I felt that I wasn't being listened to when I'm trying to raise concerns about this and questions about this. Sasha already lost once to Ronda Rousey. Now you want to throw her in there with her a second time in a match that wouldn't even be featured on a major show. It would be a throwaway match to give Ronda a warm body to beat. Sasha Banks against Ronda Rousey is a SummerSlam match. Sasha Banks against Ronda Rousey is a Clash at the Castle match. Sasha Banks against Ronda Rousey is a potential WrestleMania match. It's not a match you throw together because you have no other credible challengers for Ronda Rousey, so this month we'll just do Sasha. 3 years ago, Sasha Banks was ready to quit WWE. She asked out of her contract. And Vince McMahon said, no, I'm going to give you 30 days to reconsider. And she took a lot more than 30 days before she came back. This was shortly after her and Bayley won and then lost the tag belts to the Iconics, again with these belts. She told Steve Austin later on that she was suffering at the time from depression. And this was even back when they first won the belts. It wasn't as if, well, they lost to the Iconics and then conveniently she was depressed. She claimed that this is something that was happening even earlier that year. Things were not right with her. She felt like she just needed to get away. And she did. She went to Japan for a little bit to do some training with Meiko Satomura, who's now the NXT UK Women's Champion. Despite all of the success that this woman has had, even before she headlined WrestleMania with Bianca Belair, she was ready to walk out on her dream job. And people at the time didn't know the reason why. They just assumed it had to do with them losing to the Iconics. And people were calling her a diva for the way that she was acting. People say that now about her. And maybe she is. I don't hang out with her. I can't say how she comes across to the people that she works with. All of a sudden, I see these reports about Sasha Banks not being well liked behind the scenes by a lot of her peers. She has no support in this situation. Maybe that's true. But as I said at the time, at her core, Sasha Banks is a wrestling fan. So it actually makes perfect sense that she would get frustrated just like we do. She knows a lot of this stuff is shit. She knows a lot of this stuff is garbage. She sees the same things that you and I do when things get bad. Sasha Banks is a star. She's not some ham and egger. If the woman is asking questions or voicing concerns not because she's trying to be a pain in the ass, but because she cares, then I don't have an issue with that. Especially if they're being told to check their attitudes by people who don't seem to respond well to getting pushback to their ideas. Would I have walked out like they did? Probably not. I may have worked the match that night and then walked out if I felt that strongly about things. Again, we still don't have the full story. This had to be brewing for a while for it to get to this point. This is more than just a simple disagreement at TV that night about a segment or a match. But here's the thing. If Naomi was supposed to win the match, that makes things even worse if she becomes number one contender and then walks out. If they stay and do the match knowing that as soon as it's over, as soon as the bell rings and they walk to the back, they're walking out of the building and they're not showing up next week, that makes things even worse. They saved them even more of a headache by walking out before the show rather than after it. Because then they'd have to just rebook the match all over again to pick a new challenger for Bianca. You know, I understand they're doing live TV. And when you walk out like that, it affects everyone. It affects the other people in the match. It affects the production team and the timing of the show. It's a team effort every Monday night. Steve Austin said that walking out on that Raw show in 2002 was the worst decision he ever made, and it cost him a lot of money. Which I'm sure is why. It was the worst decision that he ever made. I would say the same thing if it cost me over $500,000. He did it for the same reason, though. He had an issue with bad creative. But the whole reason they were even going to have him lose to Brock Lesnar in that King of the Ring qualifier, unannounced, on a random episode of Raw, was because he dared to speak ill of WWE creative. He spoke out publicly about what he called their shitty creative on their Bite This show, on their own audio show, a couple of weeks before he walked out, on their own internet show. So booking that match with Brock was a direct response from Vince McMahon. It was his way of putting Austin in his place and sticking it to him. Only Austin stuck it to them by walking out and going home. Vince McMahon at the time, he called it the cardinal sin. The worst thing that you could do was walk out on your fans. No, the worst thing you could do to your fans is subject them to the same shitty booking over and over and over again for years on end. I think that's much worse. I've heard people say that guaranteed contracts are what led to the demise of WCW. It was the beginning of the end when they started giving people guaranteed money. They no longer had any incentive to perform to the highest of their ability. They could just show up and do the bare minimum, and it didn't matter because they were going to make the same amount of money regardless. That's WWE's entire business model today. That entire company is running off guaranteed money from their TV contracts and their Peacock deal. Billions of dollars that they're guaranteed regardless of how awful their television shows might get. With Sasha Banks, this is not the first time that she's gone home. After the last time, she ended up re-signing with the company. Every chance she gets, she has been on social media thanking Vince McMahon. If you follow her on Twitter or anything like that, or Instagram or whatever, I've seen these messages, oh, thank you, Vince McMahon. You know, Vince and I are friends. She'll do interviews and stuff, and they'll ask her about her career. Yeah, Vince and I, we're good friends. She says this all the time. This should be a wake-up call for Sasha Banks and anybody else, frankly, in that company, but especially Sasha Banks. Vince McMahon is not your friend. He's not your buddy. He never was your buddy. He had a buddy under contract last year, and he fired him. Now he works for AEW, and we barely get to see him on TV. He's your boss, and he doesn't care about your crappy tag team titles. They're an annoyance to him. If she is that creatively dissatisfied that she feels that walking out of a live Monday Night Raw is the only way to send a message, the next walkout from her needs to be when her contract is up. If she is that unhappy with the way that she is being booked, if she feels that she is not being respected enough, she's been there long enough now that she needs to decide if she is truly happy staying in WWE or if she wants to leave and go somewhere else. She has to understand that the same thing is going to happen again and again and again. She's going to have to make a decision. Have I done all that I can do here, or is it time for me to go work somewhere else? And this is where the story gets a little more interesting. Because there was a former WWE writer who appeared on the Masked Man podcast this week claiming that not only is Naomi's contract set to expire soon, which I had already read about that, but Sasha Banks has her deal with WWE set to expire soon too. When I say soon, I'm talking in the next couple of months. Which means that the company has probably been trying to get the two of them to sign something now for at least a few months. They don't just let the contract lapse. I mean, this isn't Jeff Jarrett, 20 some odd years ago here. Probably 6 months out, they're shoving a contract in your face saying, here, sign this. Timing makes sense. If both of their contracts were up that soon and neither woman had signed a new deal yet, if they were negotiating for it or holding out on it, it makes sense that WWE would want to take them and use them to put over the champions. Possibly on their way out if they thought there was a chance that they might leave. We may have figured out why Naomi winning that six-pack challenge felt like it came out of nowhere. I support Sasha and Naomi standing up to bad creative. But if we find out that this was less a stand against bad creative and more of a power play for a better contract or more money disguised as this stand against bad creative, then I have less sympathy for them. I don't think that's what this was, but if it comes out that that's all this was, then I have, virtually no sympathy for them. On SmackDown, right before the Usos came out for the main event. How's that for timing? Right before Jimmy Uso is about to walk to the ring, they have Michael Cole sitting at the announce desk, making the announcement that Sasha Banks and Naomi let us all down by walking out of Raw on Monday before their scheduled main event. He said their actions disappointed millions of WWE fans and their fellow superstars. So because of what they did, Sasha and Naomi have been suspended indefinitely, and we will have a future tournament to crown new women's tag team champions. You had to know that WWE would take action. They walked out of a TV taping. I support their decision, but they had to know that there would be consequences. I figured a fine or a suspension. They suspended them. They stripped them of the titles. They pulled down their merch because they don't want to have to pay them any royalties. Some people were like, why would they do that? Because they can just mark them as clearance and make money off it. They don't want to pay them. That's the whole point. That's why they just yanked everything. Boy, they're really going all out here to make this look real. This is the most elaborate work since Cody, supposedly leaving AEW and going back to WWE. Just wait until he wins the WWE title and drops it in a garbage can on Dynamite. It's all part of the master plan. Wouldn't shock me if there are still idiots out there who believe that. But this is getting nasty. If it wasn't for the fact that their contracts were almost up, I would never believe that there was a chance they would let Sasha Banks go. Sasha more so than Naomi. But now I'm not so sure. If WWE wants to make their lives hell, they could freeze their contracts, however many months are left on them, to stop them from going somewhere else. Drag them through a lengthy court battle if it comes to that. WWE has a lot more money to burn than they do, if they really wanted to be vindictive. We've seen them be vindictive before. We've seen them be petty and vindictive in the past. They can do that. Naomi is married into the bloodline. Roman Reigns is the most powerful person in that company, not named Vince McMahon or Nick Khan. And she's married to his cousin. Might not matter. It might not matter. By the way, this idea that I have seen floated that Naomi may have been manipulated into leaving with Sasha, all I could do is just laugh. I saw Cameron, her former Funkadactyls tag team partner, she gave an interview to Steve Fall on SEScoops.com, saying that she believes Naomi was influenced by someone to leave the show and that Naomi wouldn't do this unless she had someone manipulating her into telling her what to do. And then she immediately followed that up by telling Naomi, hey, if you need a tag team partner to come help you out, call me. We could still make a dream team happen. Tell me you're angling for a job without actually telling me you're angling for a job. Naomi is a grown woman. She can think for herself. As for Sasha, people are posting memes about Sasha being all elite. I got news for you. If Sasha Banks is upset with the way that she's been used lately in WWE, it wouldn't be much better for her in AEW. She'd be a gigantic addition to that women's roster, no doubt. And all of the Sasha stans would follow her to the ends of the earth. But you look at the amount of time they give the women in AEW and how they're used on TV relative to the men, there may be a honeymoon period at first. But it wouldn't be long before we're hearing similar stories and she is unhappy in AEW as well. I don't think that would work out as well as people think. AEW still has a lot of work to do on that front. As far as them running a tournament to crown new tag team champions, they couldn't even come up with enough of their own women to fill up a Royal Rumble match this year. They had to call back more old names than ever before. They called up people who don't even work for their company. They called up the Impact Knockouts champion to be in the Royal Rumble match. Which was cool, because we're not used to seeing WWE do that. You think they did that out of the goodness of their heart? Give me a break. And they have no tag team division either. Yes, of course, they can take anybody they want to and smush them together and make a tag team. They could call people up from NXT if they want to and put a bunch of random teams together. What is the point? They keep the women's tag belts around. I guess it's only a matter of time before they end up on Nikki and Brie. You knew the Bella Twins would hold them at some point. Maybe now they'll go to the Bella Twins as the women's tag team champions. Why bother? Just get rid of them, use them for scrap metal, and move on. You don't want them. Stop pretending that you do and just move on. But I'm not going to sit here as somebody who has criticized my fair share of creative decisions that WWE has made, and as somebody who wants things to get better, and I do. I'm not going to then turn around when somebody actually does push back and raises a stink about it and sit here and tell them to shut up. You get paid nicely to keep your mouth shut and do what you're told. Maybe that's the problem. We need more people in that company with a spine, not less.